Ladies and gentlemen, as liberal states, we have to respect the choice of individual, choice to debate, choice to fall in love with someone. We have to guarantee also the choice to choose your own culture. This is a significant choice of individual because it's concerned with your entire life. With the critics for those kind of choices of the culture, critics is necessarily an obstacle for the individual to opt into your preferable culture, which is jeopardize the life of individual. So we proudly propose the motion. Let me define the motion. 2 points. The first, we define the criticize, that is to say express your own disapproval for the adopting a non-Western culture. For example, we clarify the cases that as Western society, you should be proud of your own culture. Adopting the other culture necessarily means you surrender to the other culture. That's why, like the Oriental culture, those kind of things, Japanese kimono or sushi or Chinese food or Chinese fashion, that means that you jeopardize the identity of your Western culture. This is a critics you identify in this debate. Secondly, liberal trend, that is to say the trend to respect the choice of the individual, to maximize the choice, happiness of the individual. This is a clear definition on this debate. Are there any point on this clarification? Okay, based on this clear setup, let me prove 2 points in my speech. First, let me prove how criticize likely to jeopardize the right to choose your own culture. Firstly, 3 points we have to explain. First, at the control of the premise we have to explain, we say what culture you will choose should be dependent on the choice of individual, because culture will be the core part of your entire life, because you live with the harmony with the culture you chose. For example, if I choose the culture of the Japan, I will opt into the culture of Japan. I live as a Japanese people. That is to say, I respect the politeness, I respect the kindness of the individual. Then I enjoy the culture of Japanese food, those kind of things, like the case of the miyagi of those kind of things. Then an individual can be confident with their own identity and the culture and maximize their happinesses. That's why the culture should not be the bus lottery. Even if you live in the westernized culture like the United States, you should have the right to choose the other culture, Oriental culture. This is a clear premise of this debate. Based on this premise, secondly, we prove the mechanism how criticize are likely to jeopardize the individual choice. 2 parts. First, as a context, as a media, in our part we assume as a context there is a tons of critics for those kind of introducing the Oriental fashion or those kind of things for the westernized culture. Like for example, in the media, in the TV, there is a conservative experts of the politician. They say that the culture of the Oriental is something inferior to the westernized culture. They are very violent in those kind of things. By saying so, they will instill those kind of individuals to believe their own westernized culture because they want to protect the conservative idea for themselves. That's why they will say in the media, the opportunity, those kind of the other culture is likely to jeopardize your choices. You should be discriminated in this country, those kind of things. By saying so, they will criticize those kind of individual. But the point here is that because the experts or those kind of people who say opinion in the TV are authorized people in a society, the usual citizens on the ground think that those authorized people are saying those kind of critics or those kind of Oriental culture, which is very difficult for me to understand. And this kind of easily, those kind of individuals are likely to be instilled those kind of norms. This is a clear false context in this debate. Secondly, based on the media, the norm will be created in the society because in the media those kind of people are saying there is a discussion among those kind of individuals. Then the vast majority of cases we can assume that introducing Oriental culture is something bad for the Westernized culture because you live as a Westernized people, you somehow have some kind of identity as Western. That's why those kind of Westernized identity are likely to be utilized to criticize those kind of Oriental fashion because already there is a non-Western culture. Vast majority of people are believing those kind of Westernized culture is good for them. That's why the vast majority of norm will be created for the Westernized culture. That's why as a norm level, there's less opportunity for the Oriental fashionable culture to exist in their paradigm because vast majority of people believe that. This is a clear context of this debate, but we say this is wrong. Okay.
We think that any social phenomenon is criticized by some groups of people. For example, women's choice to be a housewife. Why the right to criticize or the choice to criticize is less important in that liberal context?
This is a point we emphasize. And the case of the women or races, there are still a companion, vast majority of cases, they have the women, the case, the half of the nation is the women, and so they have the companion, they can create their own norm. But especially in the case of introducing the other culture, like Oriental culture in Western culture, vast majority of people respect Western culture. That's like those kind of massive amount of the big discourse to support Western culture in the vast majority of cases. That's why by number they cannot win those kind of norm defined with the other identity, gender, those kind of things. That's why this will override those kind of opinion of the minority Oriental people. That's why this is a clear point of this debate. At the consequence of the mechanism, why it's bad? 2 points. Firstly, the company or industry which try to go to the westernized society likely to decrease because the company of the Japan think that in United States the denial of the culture of Japan is prevailing. That's why even if I go to that area outside Japanese sushi cannot make profit of those kind of things. By thinking those calculation, no thank you, they think they don't have the incentive to actively opt into the society of the westernized culture, meaning there's less platform as an individual in the United States to opt into the culture of the Japanese culture, those kind of things. That's why there's no premise for the individual to choose their own preferable culture. This is a significant problem. Secondly, that even if there is a company, the industry in the United States, the individual less incentive to opt into those kind of things because if they opt into, they will be criticized by the vast majority of people in the United States or those kind of things. By thinking so, they have to possibly choose to opt into the westernized culture even if they don't want to, meaning they have to jeopardize their own culture, they don't want to live as a westernized culture, but they have to opt in. This is crucial harmful for that individual. They have to be stressful in every time, anytime. That's why this is truly harmful for individual. Compared to that in all paradigms, because in outside of house, assuming there's no critics, there's a company or those guys with massive incentive to opt in. That's why there are many platforms, and based on this platform, without the critics, I can choose whatever you want, preferable choices. That's why they can be proud of their own culture. They can be satisfied for their own. This is brilliant choice of individual. So we proudly propose the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, speaker, for his speech. I call upon read our position.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the government side, we are not opposing to all kinds of criticism, ladies and gentlemen. We are opposing to the criticism which is made based upon the divisions between the Western cultures and the non-Western cultures, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, we are supporting the criticism based upon the content or the qualities of the art, ladies and gentlemen. We fundamentally believe that the criticism which is made based upon the Western or non-Western culture, it is extremely hard things to refute to such kind of a criticism, and therefore this is jeopardizing the freedom of choices of the citizens. Also, the culture is exclusively important to maximize our own happinesses, ladies and gentlemen. And more importantly, even if we take their kind of stances, the our side home won't change because the liberalism is extremely the dominant power in the Western societies, and in such a cases that this is rather harmful for the individuals, like making individuals process or making their own preferences or making their concept of the lives or something like that. Therefore, we are very proud to propose these motions. The all rebuttals are included in my speech. three things to talk about from opening government. So first of all, I'm going to further explain about the choice of the individuals, and I'm going to further explain about why the criticism, especially from the recent liberalism trend, is extremely hard to contest, and why that kind of situation that the choice to choose a culture is jeopardizing by now. And the second of all, I'm going to tell you why in our Southwest House we can secure more number of the qualified information for the citizens, why in our Southwest House we can secure the diverse type of the choice for the citizens to pick up the most best cultures for their own preferences. And third of all, I'm going to briefly told you that why for the promotions of the liberalism, why the recent liberalism trend to criticize the non-Western cultures is why for the promotions of the liberalism, why this kind of criticism is harmful. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the choice of individuals. We say that, as I told you before, we say that we are completely opposing the criticism that is made based upon the differences between the Western cultures and the non-Western cultures. I'm going to tell you that the two reasons why this kind of information is not the suitable information to maximize the choice of individuals. So first of all, we say simply, especially the Western societies, we say that the amount of the information which regarding the culture is completely different. Because in the Western societies, a lot of persons normally supports the cultures of their own countries, ladies and gentlemen. Because they normally have the identity with these places. At the same time, they normally have the loving affections with the places where you were born, ladies and gentlemen. In such a cases, the more simply in the very first place is the more number of the persons have the motivations to highly evaluate their own culture in the very first place. At the same time, it is extremely easy things to accept this kind of remarks, ladies and gentlemen. In such a cases, we say that the dominant narrative of this kind of society is that just supporting their own cultures and not evaluating the non-Western cultures, ladies and gentlemen. And the second reason is that the criticism based upon the Western cultures and non-Western culture is extremely disadvantageous for the non-Western cultures, because the peoples have the preconception that the Western societies and the Western culture is always a good thing, and the Western have always a more like the liberal atmosphere than the non-Western culture, ladies and gentlemen. For example, the case of by the explanations of conducting the humanitarian intervention or something like that, they always have the experience of the Western cultures and the Western political identity is better than the non-Western cultures, ladies and gentlemen. In such a cases, it is easy things for the Western, the persons promoting the Western societies to say that Western culture is much more better than the non-Western cultures. We say that in such a cases, what is the consequences of such kind of situations? We say, as I told you before, in the Western societies, the dominant narrative is that they are only evaluating the Western societies, this regardless of the content and regardless of the artificial sense of the cultures, ladies and gentlemen. We say that in such a cases, the peoples can't pick up the artificially variable cultures for themselves, ladies and gentlemen. We see this is rather jeopardizing the choice of individual in the very first place. Before moving on to my second point, closing.
Okay, if you respect individual choice as liberal democracies, why don't you respect the right of people who want to prioritize Western value? For example, elderly don't want to see their residence surrounded by Muslim building or merging whatsoever.
Yeah, I do recognize that even if there's the mutual equal standpoint between the persons who are promoting something and the persons who are opposing something, in such a case, even if that these are equal things, we are supporting such situations. But as I told you before, this is not equal situations. The dominant narrative is only promoting the Western culture in the very first place. At the same time, this kind of criteria to support the Western culture is extremely absurd and unreasonable things, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we are regulating this kind of trend to criticize such things. So I'm going to tell you why our side is better for maximization of individual choice. As I told you before in my introductions, we are supporting that criticism based upon the content of the qualities or something like that. In such a cases, for example, as the opening of opposition told you, that some kind of misogynistic movies should be criticized from the society or something like that. We say that we do have the criticism for such kind of misogynistic movies or discriminatory movies, ladies and gentlemen, simply because that is discriminative and that is misogynistic. This is not based upon the criticism of the Western cultures or the non-Western culture in the very first places. Therefore, we think that what the best case scenario of the government side is not something to oppose this motion in the very first place. At the same time, in our side of the South, we purely evaluate the artificial qualities or artificial, like the sense of the cultures, ladies and gentlemen. In such a case, the people are easy to choose the best two cultures at that moment and at that places, ladies and gentlemen. In such a case, the people is easy to pick up the good choices for themselves. And what's more, in our side of the South, we will increase the amount of the variety of the cultures in the very first places, because we will not exclude the non-Western cultures because of that is a non-Western cultures. In such a case, the divergence of the choice is extremely important, because this will simply increase the probability to pick up the best cultures, because the people's preference is different from person to person. The more we have the cultural differences, diversities, the more the people can have the possibility to pick up the most suitable cultures. And more importantly, I'm going to tell you, for the promotions of the liberalism, why their side is bad things. Because in their side of the South, they will automatically oppose to some kind of the non-Western cultures or non-Western cultures, because based upon because that is a misogynistic or something like that. In such cases, this is completely jeopardizing the choice to pick up the non-Western cultures, ladies and gentlemen, because the non-Western culture is a lot of things, their side is automatically denying all kind of non-Western cultures. But in our side of the South, we purely evaluate the qualities or such kind of things, that the diversities of the culture will still remain in our side of the South, therefore we oppose.
I thank speaker for his speech. I call upon Vicky leader of opposition.
Note, Mr. Speaker, that opening government actually ignored our leader opposition's argument when we told you how pernicious the process of adoption is. But their only argumentation against that was they have a choice, individuals in society have a choice. So the first thing I want to do in the leader opposition is we want to crack down on that choice. We do think choice is something important in society, but particularly this choice, the choice of Western society to adopt this non-Western society, is something rather comparatively unimportant, and we don't think that's a basis for us to adopt that positive choice. Second of all, what we want to do from deputy lead option is, particularly if you look how this kind of adoption is happening, why it is very important for Western liberals to criticize it in a strong manner. Because closing government side might argue that this is going beyond too much, it's something excessive. We rather tell you, this is a required amount of criticism which is happening right now, and without this, it's something pernicious. We're going to tell you how important the criticization which is occurring right now is important. All my reflections will be integrated in my speech. So moving on to the first part, why the Western society and the individual's choice to adopt is something unjustifiable and not a basis for these people to adopt that thing. Two reasons, because there was a basic assumption coming up. First, because in the process of adopting, as we've already pointed out, they have to change the picture of the culture, and it makes it, the adoption requires you, the Western society, to make that culture yours. We don't think with the non-Western cultures, for thousands here, have been garnering those values, or have been making these things or protecting these values. We don't have the non-Western people have a right to come into the society and change it because of they want it to be in a suitable manner. But more importantly, if we compare the kind of choice which the Western society has versus the choices that the non-Western society has, we think in the comparison in and of itself, these Western societies do not have a reason to choose them. Because the Western society, historically, numerically, and legally have their own protected values and have their own cultural values. So they might have, some individuals might not be happy with that lottery of birth, but for the vast majority of citizens within that Western culture society, they are able to subscribe to their own culture and have a background they can fall behind when they want some kind of culture they want to subscribe to. But what's the comparison side of non-Western cultures existing in the Western society? Particularly because these Western cultures, non-Western cultures, in the process of adoption, they're denied their birthright. Because we've already told you how this culture is more likely to be in the current society, being appropriated and how being is changed around and how the shape is different. There's stereotypes being imposed, and this is the kind of society how it exists. So in the process of the choice, these non-Western people cannot subscribe to their own choice, because now when it's changed, for example, first of all, they're dictated on the Western view of those non-Western societies. You're being told, oh, you're un-Japanese, because Western people think Japanese people have to be polite, and that thus you not being polite means you're not Japanese, and you're denied of your cultural subscription, and you're denied your birthright to subscribe to those things. So ultimately the conclusion is, for the choice, if we want to have that choice for Western people to subscribe, it results in the denial of non-Western citizens having the choice to take those birthrights. And this is particularly pernicious because as non-Western cultural citizens do not have a way to subscribe to white culture. Because white culture or Western culture is more likely deemed for those individuals who are Western and those kind of things. They're not allowed to subscribe. You're going to be looked at peculiar ways when you try to act in a white manner. So these people, non-Western people, are in a dilemma and a vacuum of a culture, particularly because their own culture is part of the Western culture right now, and they cannot subscribe to this thing. And we think this is more pernicious than the argumentation coming from open government, which is that birth lottery is bad. Because yes, birth lottery might be bad for some individuals, but if that is, we think it's more important for these individuals to be able to pursue their birthright and to at least have some culture for their own sakes and be able to exercise that birthright before we have. When the comparison is an opening government's world where some individuals in the Western society can freely go beyond the boundaries of birthright versus the non-Western citizens not having their ability to access their birthright. We don't want that choice from opening government. We rather want to protect the choice of these individuals to be able to subscribe. And furthermore, opening government didn't tell us why this particular way of choice must be the way for those people if they want to self-actualize. Because even in the Western culture, there are a variety of values and there are a variety of cultures which are not non-Western oriented. Hippie culture, goth culture, emo culture, rock culture. There's a variety of cultures if you're able to subscribe, if you're just unhappy with yours. They have to tell us why, because they're only unsatisfied with your own culture, you have a right to take other people's cultures into yours and appropriate that and adopt it for your own sake. And this instance only, we don't think the argumentation coming from government side that choice is important, thus we have to allow these individuals to adopt that thing, stands into this debate. Before we get to the second point on how this choice is actually pernicious and as to how liberals should criticize things and how this is problematic and its required extent of criticization, closing.
Your argument makes some sense in logical manner, but how do Western people eating sushi influence the right of Japanese to eat Japanese sushi?
No, that's not the second point. Because government side only tries to nitpick the very curious examples of people being very understandable and considerate of the non-Western cultures. But that's not the truth. Because for every single person, for every individual who's understanding of the non-Western culture, there are a plethora of individuals who misunderstand and appropriate the non-Western culture in this way. This is particularly because for requiring or understanding to appropriately adopt non-Western culture, it requires for higher standard and a holistic understanding of what that culture it is in that self. But when individuals only consume for their own sake, when they adopt the Western culture because they want something which is not innate to this, and they want to have something different, it is unlikely that kind of understanding happens. No, thank you. And that's why we see in society, for example, people wearing geisha clothes to parties, particularly because they want to be slutty, or particularly because they think it's something exotic. That's why we don't think that one kind of example of these people being understanding justifies all the other adoption process and how that pernicious is. And why is this particularly problematic? No, thank you. So we've told you from opening option how in that process of adoption, yes, there might be some good examples, but we've told you from the various other reasons, it gets overridden, and in most times, you can't be the center of the people, because in most Western societies, the majority of West people and non-Western citizens are marginalized minorities who are not able to be the center of their culture. Why is this particularly problematic? First, because once those kind of values overwritten by Western societies are entrenched, it is very hard for those non-Western societies to take back those values. Particular case of this is how the Indian culture or Native American culture is used in the United States. Because if you look how Native Americans are used, in the case of the Redskins, or how the Indians are depicted on movies, they're always in a manner of which is dignifying, undignifying, and is unoffensive. But because of the fact that it has been normalized in society, and they think it's already adopted, it's very hard to, because people think it's something okay, and they cannot take back. And this is particularly problematic when we've told you the impacts of culture not being, you're not being able to subscribe to that culture. That's why we think it's very important for liberals to adhere that choice, a liberal choice, that we want to respect the non-Western cultural individuals to have that choice. Because at the very basic of our liberal value is every individual being able to access their own right, and every individual able to further their goals. That's why we think we need excessive criticization to any prospective birth of these kind of problematic appropriations. That's why we have to criticize it in a manner they're doing, because the result of this appropriation, once it happens, is very hard to overturn and is pernicious for these communities. That's why we need to criticize this thing massively, and that's why some examples of unification or some examples of understanding doesn't justify. We rather prefer a society where these people do not adopt those kind of values, and that's why we oppose this motion. Thank you very much.
I thank speaker for his speech. I call on member of government.
So the debate today is not about whether criticism to these appropriation or adoption is good or not. It's about the recent trend and the ways in which we've seen recently in Twitter or Facebook that form of criticism is good or not. What do we see recently? We saw a white girl wearing Japanese kimono, showing that on a post on Facebook. And that we saw hundreds of criticism from liberal individuals saying that you should behave yourself, that it's shameful, that you try to appropriate the culture and deprive the dignity of Japanese people. But Japanese people didn't think that way. It was just selling out their culture and selling how awesome their Japanese culture is. And some people, Japanese people, also criticized that criticism on the same feed. But it was just ignored and flushed away by the hundreds of criticisms that went on by these liberals. But also the funny thing is that this liberal criticism misunderstood the white painting of geisha done by the girl. They thought that it was a really discriminatory mimicking of this Japanese culture, was like trying to make it silly, like we see with blackfacing that we saw, with that liberals think people think that it's so discriminatory. So the innate nature that we want to point out of the recent criticism is that it's not sincere. It's just that it's contaminated by bashing lovers, but it's also dismissive of the intent on the minorities because it's all flush of saying that it's all bad, and don't recognize the people criticizing it, but also that it's dismissively and utterly ignorant itself. That trend of these individuals having stronger voices, able to capture the discourse of liberalism, but also shut out minorities' opportunity to sell their culture and export it and further strengthen it, is then dangerous. 3 points of extension. One, on why that trend exists and why the current criticism is contaminated. Second, on why this trend of criticism is simply illiberal. Thirdly, on how this trend of liberalism and criticism rather harms the minorities they seek to protect. Before that, 2 rebuttals. First, the argument from OO is that it entrenches stereotypes. But we don't understand that to a great extent, because the fact that you see some Japanese kimono and their modest and sort of characteristic doesn't really equally transcend to the Asian neighbor of your colleague or the person you're working with. Like, you're just an ordinary person. It's not like you automatically internalize that narrative or assume that that person is in the same way. Like, we think that we are able to behave ourselves and don't know that sort of stereotyping or discrimination is wrong as an ordinary individual. But to the extent that we concede that there are some unfortunate people that internalize that, they're probably people who want to go on with it, like conservative people or already discriminatory people. And they have other reasons to internalize that or discriminate these Asian people in the first place, so that doesn't make a difference. Second, on ownership. Like they say that so people are deprived of the right to be in the center of their own culture, and that's probably bad. But they don't tell us how that's bad. Who's going to be harmed on an economic level, or how their dignity or whatsoever is harmed. Like, rhetorically we understand that, but it's just rhetorics of saying that it's a cultural invasion. But how is a cultural invasion bad? Who is harmed? And we point to the fact is that when these cultures are bashed, and the ability of, say, Japanese cultures export their culture is inhibited, their ability to economically survive in the vulnerability of a traditional culture is further more problematic because it's directly harming these individuals and its cultures itself of its sustenance, extension. So, we already told you that this culture is an exclusionary and ignorant one. It is unfortunately that way because we see a recent trend of liberalism being the divine way of being the most inclusive and the most respectable thing. Like, we like liberalism because it tries to respect all the other people. The problem is that some individuals think that that's the reason why it should be the ultimate thing, and other ideologies that are incompatible with liberalism should be denied and exclusive. That's why movements like Antifa or movements simply that go on with bashing any other ideology that is incompatible with liberalism is actually bashed, and these people bashing it think it's ultimately something definitely must be done, and that's why they go on with saying that I think I'm right and my bashing is definitely right, and this whole flow of bashing is something like the trend of defeating evil and something that shouldn't be rejected. But also it's just people who love bashing that are also included in it. It's not like they're necessarily truly liberal, but it's people who just want to be on the winning side, who just want to bash people and look good. These sort of people are at the center and at the front of this bashing. And obviously it's because being a liberal guy looks good in that country. And that means that's why this trend is so ignorant, it's so just going on in that way, and also dismissive of the minorities' will. Based on that, what is the harm? Before going, sure.
Liberal criticization is not only what you're talking about. Criticization happens when, for example, Hollywood casts most of the actors. Why do you only nitpick that precise part of the Antifa?
That's why I have my first extension. That we point to the fact that this flow of liberalism criticism clouds out other proper criticisms. Because other proper criticisms by Hollywood individuals or concretely detailed articles require proper interaction for that criticism or discourse to be happening or making any sense. But at least it's like if, for example, in Twitter, it has strong analysis, so it's going to be like a 10-tweet sort of package, which when other individuals are simply bashing and there's hundreds of replies on that tweet saying that you should behave yourself, you're shameful, you're discriminatory, you should behave yourself as thousands of individuals, that criticism is washed away, forgotten. And also it's important is that liberals, these good liberals and these ignorant liberals are both liberal. And people who you want to persuade or interact with all see that generally liberalism hates us and they're really trying to bash us. I saw this concrete, good-looking criticism for 50 seconds on my timeline, but it was just flushed away. It means that they lose faith in the criticism in liberals and don't want to interact with it. They're just bashing crazy people that I don't want to really listen to. And that's when proper discourse doesn't even make sense. But at least it's contaminated and diluted by that flow of that recent trend. No, thank you. But it's also important to understand that white individuals also have the right to enjoy diverse cultures. These guys are just tourists. They just want to enjoy the culture, but they're just bashed for no reason. That they're just trying to mimic other cultures, just trying to enjoy their own way of life. And that's obviously liberal because these people obviously have the right to enjoyment, and that's why it's just unjustifiable. So let's go on to how they harm minorities. It's important to note that this bashing consequently leads to the chilling effect of consumption of these cultures or simply trying to understand these sort of cultures. That means that when Japanese kimonos or minority cultures of say tribes or certain indigenous cultures try to sell their dancing, sell their clothing, sell their way of pride or narrative, it's something that other white individuals cannot consume, because if they consume and say it on Twitter or things like that, talk about conversation, they have the fear that they will be bashed. The consequence is that when these minority cultures are just traditional and often require government subsidy, when they're already vulnerable with a lack of successors, their ability to strive to get payment or simply have more successors is diminished. That's important, like we see in Japanese culture. Many traditional cultures are sustained by foreign individuals being the successor of their know-how and techniques. When that interaction is impossible, and when simply argue upon the other culture and bash, the ability of the culture itself to sustain is lost. And I think this liberal trend is just abhorrent of what we propose.
I thank speaker for his speech. I call upon member of opposition.
Thank you, Mr. and Madam Speaker. Basically speaking, we think there are various types of criticism. And at the moment, when closing government says the criticism is polluted and dominated by these people who just want to bash others on a whim, or who just want to get into those kind of trends, we think there is a counter-criticism from legit organizations such as criticism against like inspiration porn or those kind of things. We think rather by these kind of contrast of criticism, people can have more ways of thinking. People can believe that rather than having Malcolm X as black rights empowerment movement, we will rather have Martin Luther King. We think those kind of rational calculus can better achieve on our side of the house. Rather, regretting the criticism in and of itself that side affirmative wants to push in this debate is going to crowd out every way of thinking, every possibility of human beings thinking on the ground, and that's why we think it's actually counterproductive. Two things to extend as member of the opposition. First of all, I'd like to tell you how specifically why the absence of regret of this criticism leads to better access of non-Western culture. That is to say, counter hold the opening government thing, that is to say access, and conclude why OO's material, that is to say necessity, will actually shine for those non-Western culture people and at the same time Western culture people. I would like to make this comparison really clear. Second, if I have time, I would like to tell you why criticism in itself is not something that we should regret. It is an opportunity for human beings to think from a different point of view, and we think that in itself is beneficial. But before that, several points of rebuttal towards the member of the government. First of all, he said that, well, Japanese people will not receive any kind of harms just by looking at some geisha imitation on those kind of Twitter. But the thing is that there are some people living in Western countries or living in USA and have these kind of microaggression from Western people. And we think that is severely damaging these people's mental security and physical security, unable to voice out what they really are. And we think this is quite damaging and just negating that Japanese people don't get harmed. It's not sensible. Simply. Second, about conservative people, and Mizukami-san said it's not contentious. These people will still discriminate at any rate. But the thing in this debate is about silent majority. How silent majority will perceive those kind of criticism and think twice or any kind of those things. So that point, that reputation on their side also does not make sense at the end of the day. Third, about the criticism. Well, they say dominant criticism is about people just criticize on a whim. But as I told you in my introduction, there are various types of criticism. Criticism against inspiration porn, or criticism against Western fashion magazines depict hijab and make a fashion hijab and make fashion burqa integrated with slightly revealing skirt or shorts, and we think these kind of criticism is legit. We say those kind of criticism will make people think that what Muslims are truly believing is the integrity with the God, and we think this will actually incentivize people to think twice. That's why nitpicking those kind of criticism by member of the government is clearly behind the context of this debate. Last of all, chilling effect. I like to counter this in my extension, that is to say, no thank you, chilling effect by vice versa actually exists. That is to say, people don't see those academician publication or serious criticism on the ground if we regret this. And non-Western people don't want to go against expectation of Western people's these kind of stereotype and consolidated ideas of commercialization and comicalization. That's why chilling effect is not mutually exclusive. I'd like to extend this more. So, the extension, but before that, let's kick out opening government. They say, well, it's simply speaking, criticism is actually going too far. But if you assume that these people are so much conservative, that Western oriented, then what happens if we remove this criticism? We think people on the ground will have an incentive to cause more direct way of opposition, that is to say hate crime or anti-West rallies or demonstrations, and encouraging politicians to have immigrants exclusion implementation, and we think opening government's case is totally counterproductive. So having that said, extensions, no. There are three types of mechanisms that we are going to push forward. That is to say, first of all, self-acceleration mechanism. Western culture as opening opposition is slightly touched. They have power, they have money, they have strategies to push forward a specific image. That is to say, when I went to San Francisco, these dream catcher or these comic about indigenous Americans, Native Americans was depicted in a way that these people are strange. These people tend to rely on violence in order to solve those kind of internal conflicts between household or whatsoever. And we think this is conveniently contributing to the image of Western people, having the image and sharing Twitter and actually implementing some selling of production or service products and service in the tourism and in drama or whatsoever. And that's why this that is self-entrenching those kind of images to general public of Western people. And second, why this is extremely harmful on our side of the house. We think like anti-Western, non-Western people cannot have any kind of power to resist that. As opening government says, it's rare. They are small in terms of number. That is to say, they don't have power to advertise in those kind of media. That is to say, they don't want to go against with the expectation of Western people. If they go against and voice out their own like genuine needs and voice out their own cultural diversity, they fear the possibility of being excluded and being out of the conversation, and we think that is severely damaging. Closing.
So the nuance of our case was that conventional constructive criticisms were not recent, and the recent ones are simplistic and ignorant. How do you support this ignorant and simplistic subset? Or is it recent that it's constructive?
Well, recent, ladies and gentlemen, it includes 5 years, 10 years, whatsoever. It's up to interpretation. But we were also happy to have criticism against, for example, inspiration from disabled communities, or criticism against excessive second wave feminist movement, and accepting diverse forms of women. We think those are also the criticism against specific idea that has gone too far, right? We don't think like CG's trying to engulf this debate in their convenient way will work at the end of the day. So let's continue. Why do we think specifically our side of the house is better? Since we will not regret these kind of criticism, these people on the ground, that is to say, anti-Western people can use this power of criticism, saying that we should have the right to self-voice out. We have those kind of cultures. We just want to have an integration between ourselves and the God. That is why we are wearing hijab. That is why we are eating these kind of food. That is to say, people can have more access to those kind of more serious channels. That is to say, NGO and NPO, and advocating those kind of information from those channels, publishing, drama, media depiction. And that is to say, Western people as a whole will conceive those kind of images as a legit thing. They will actually communicate in these kind of ways. These people don't have to self-disguise themselves. And we think this is the true value that Western liberal democracies should protect. That is to say, autonomy and self-governance. And that is why this motion fails.
I thank Speaker for his speech. I call upon government with.
The opposition case is just justifying the criticism towards a misunderstanding or distortion of non-Western cultures. They're not justifying the criticism itself or the adoption of non-Western cultures in the other house. It's not about this motion. We told you how adoption of non-Western culture itself doesn't deserve criticism. Because firstly, it is less empowering their side of the house to empower the cultures of non-Western people, and also it is against the ideology and against the liberal discourse in our side of the house to protect. So from government way, I want to talk about two perspectives. Firstly, for non-Western cultures, which is better, and secondly, simply, which is better for liberal itself and liberal ideology. So firstly, for non-Western cultures. From opening opposition, they are somehow trying to protect the choice of non-Western people by saying non-Western citizens' right to subscribe to their own culture will be infringed in their side of the house, our side of the house. First, as we already pointed out in the point of information, Western people enjoying non-Western cultures don't infringe the right of non-Western culture to subscribe to their own culture. They will try to say, we only provide only example of sushi, and in most cases, the cultures are misunderstood and misinterpreted. But sushi is the best example of misunderstanding, right? California or those kind of Western type of culture, Western type of sushi is prevail the Western culture. But it doesn't mean it infringes the right of Japanese people to subscribe the original type of Japanese sushi in Japanese culture. It doesn't mean the infringement of non-Western culture in our side of the house. Even though it is misunderstood in some different culture, it doesn't mean the infringement of the original culture in the original region. That doesn't make sense. Secondly, on the contrary to their hypothetical argument, we told you the adoption of culture itself empowers non-Western people to subscribe to their own culture. We told you more participants in the culture, meaning the more people are more likely to be interested with the proper or genuine type of culture in the original culture. For example, many Western people are actually engaging with the Japanese traditional type of agriculture or industries. For example, the Japanese Koei is already adopted by the Western people and succeeded by those people in the status quo. Even if it's misunderstood, sometimes it's still empowering the culture, because after the culture is adopted, even in the long way, more people are likely to be interested in the culture, and more people are likely to be interested in the genuine, original type of culture after actually adoption happens in the outside the house. That's why outside the house can more empower the people and choice of individuals in non-Western peoples. And secondly, the ownership argument is a bit nuanced, different nuance by opening opposition. Firstly, problem doesn't exist in the first place. Sushi is broadly adopted in the Western cultures, and cultural rules are already Western type of assets by the Western people. But still, we have Japanese traditional type of sushi in Japanese culture, and we have ownership of the traditional original type of the culture, even after ownership of some different culture is there. Secondly, even if the original culture is somehow diluted and changed by the Western society, they didn't explain why it is problematic. Because all the culture are changing by influence by outside and internal influence. For example, Japanese is already sometimes frontier of Western cultures by the existence of designers or industries committed to Western cultures. It doesn't mean Japanese somehow steal the Western culture, and it just means culture is enjoyed by more and more people outside of the culture, and participants have the right to engage with culture and change the culture by the influence of it. When people accept that change, we think there is no problem that isn't explained in the outside house. So the best possible reaction for the level of people is to clarify this particular type of adoption is a bit different from the original nuance of that culture. That clarification is at best the possible reaction in the Western level of people in the outside house. So before moving to my second point, closing.
The reason why typicalization and comicalization of those culture is problematic from the viewpoint of Western liberal democracies is because they advocate self-governance and self-representation. How do you think the value judgment is legit on your side?
We told you from the first place, we are not talking about the precedent was a misinterpretation, a distortion of culture. We are talking adoption of culture itself is not problematic, and change of the culture itself is not problematic from the perspective of real people in the outside of us. So secondly, the liberal discourse and liberal ideology. Thank you. Firstly, I want to clarify the misunderstanding extension coming from closing opposition. It is already touched from the opening opposition. We don't think any extension coming from closing opposition. And they are talking about somehow it's not legit to distort the culture or so forth. But we told you after adoption itself, we can check with the better interpretation of original culture with a better type of culture in the original meaning. We think without adoption itself, we cannot have the proper discussion about what kind of culture is appropriate and what kind of interpretation is appropriate from the perspective original people engaging in the culture. We don't think the misunderstanding in the first place doesn't mean the entire influencement of rights of people who are engaging with non-Western cultures. No, thank you. Then they're somehow trying to say that criticism towards criticism cannot happen in the outside house. Firstly, we already multiple times told you this is not the recent mainstream or liberal trend. Closing opposition trying to say, in case of disabled people's inspiration porn and feminism, many criticism towards criticism happen in the outside of the house. But it doesn't mean this is similarly happening in the case of cultural appropriation in the outside of the house. There is no factual evidence coming from the outside of the house. How criticism towards criticism can happen in the outside of the house, there is no engagement coming from the outside. And even if their mechanism of criticism somewhat happens, it's not to support the criticism towards the adoption itself. We told you criticism towards adoption itself is just cheering out the people who want to adopt the culture. We told you from a member of government, when a white girl tries to wear kimono and it posted in the Facebook, 1,000 people reacted, 1,000 people criticized it, defended it. We think in that circumstances, many number of people hesitated to adopt the culture because they will be criticized before they are thinking about what kind of way is more appropriate and proper way of adoption of culture. We told you criticism itself is problematic. So then we told you from the perspective of real value, we have to protect the choice of the individual to subscribe to the non-Western culture. From closing government, we told you that adoption or participating in the Western culture to the non-Western culture itself is empowering the choice of individual who want to subscribe to non-Western culture. It's uniquely problematic in the level want to protect the choice of the individual in non-Western people. And also from perspective of discourse, we're happy to welcome the discourse after adoption itself. That is a clear stance of the level of people to welcome the discourse after adoption happens, what kind of way of adoption is more appropriate and more proper. That is a stance that level of people should take. Mr. Speaker, we admit some problem in that adoption exists in outside house. It doesn't mean criticism to adoption itself is justified from the past historical people who that reason we are very proud to their votes.
I thank speaker for his speech. I call upon opposition view.
Opening half was lacking in the comparison of these two paradigms. Opening government just talked about the choice without telling us how the choice will be different under each side of the house. And also opening opposition just told about the problem or the necessity of having criticism without telling us the effect of those criticisms. We uniquely told the effect of these criticisms and how it is possible to make a better choice for people, better qualified option for people, and better understanding of those cultures. So basically, my speech will be constructed with 2 points. Firstly, the effect of these criticisms and the comparison within these two paradigms. And secondly, lastly, I'm going to have clean out the choice and opportunity kind of arguments. So firstly, the effect of these criticisms. So firstly, we have to look at the effect of the current way of adopting non-Western culture, which was something very complicated in this debate. We say that the movement to adopt both appropriately and inappropriately has already been a strong trend in the current realistic context. That is to say, the opening government's analysis that those current adopting trend is so very weak is nonsense. We already have many sushi shop in US or many those culture importing under the current context. The problem is that it is only controlled by the Western corporation for their own interests, or for the Western people for their own interests. And for example, fashion hijabs that is very exposurous and very seductive and very sexy and very fashionable is only for the Western interest, which neglects all the kinds of dignity or the background of those people in this non-Western culture. So we think that these are the current trend that is already happening. But we say that even if all the adopting is conducted appropriately, we told you why it is still rather to have criticism, which I'm going to talk about later. So specifically talking about the effect of this criticism, because the comparison required in this debate is the outcome of the world, outcome of the world where there are criticism and where not. No, thank you. That is to say, it was not enough to just identify the problem that the conduct of adopting contains. So we, closing opposition, uniquely told you the effect of these criticism. So firstly, the kind of criticism. So first one, we tell you that it is a retrospective debate. That is to say, this motion is not about criticism, nor about conventional conservative criticism, but it's about the criticism that is claimed by the recent liberals and how it is conducted under the current moment. That is to say, the whole analysis on the especially on the opening government was lacking sense. But two, we say that if this closing government's logic is true, that it is so liberal that it is too easy for people to bash on Twitter and Facebook, exactly in the same way, it's much more likely to attract more qualified criticism to those insane bashing on Twitter or Facebook. The exclusive benefit under our paradigm is that you have much more qualified criticism and scrutinized outcome, the understanding of those non-Western culture. Because if you have much more criticism to one point, you have much more logical, rational criticism to persuade people not to believe them. And they never told why the liberal context only has a propensity to discriminate and marginalize certain minority, especially when the current social trend or the policy making is moving in the way that rectifies those marginalization for people. For example, affirmative action, like anti-discrimination laws or anti-hate speech law. We're moving in the trend that like rectify those marginalization, and it's much more likely to have those like better criticism that like best understand those non-Western culture. But 3, at minimum, we can protect the most vulnerable under our side of the house. For example, because we say that, for example, geisha woman in Japan who grew up in a very genuine geisha tradition and was educated for a long time to be a geisha, when we show that her own tradition and culture is distorted in like US and people genuinely think that that is the way of geisha, her like decades of like training as a geisha or educated as a geisha is like very offense and very like lose sense and lose meaning and lose understanding by the people. And the burden that they had to prove is that why these like criticism that which contains like a possibility to have a positive effect or negative effect should like be excluded at all, because we think that the only illegitimate criticism should be the hate speeches, which is intentionally directly like try to like intimidate people or like assault on their like mental feelings. So that's why we think that even the quality of these criticism is a bit like reverse. We think that it is still better on our side of the house to have these criticism closing.
So you do invite maybe 10 good criticisms, but you also invite 1,000 F words of blackmailing and threatening. How is that constructive, and who would want to adopt in that environment?
I couldn't see why like there is a so like power imbalance in those criticism when we look at this very liberal context. But we also say it is not just about number, but it's about more logical, persuasive, and rational criticism that is like accepted by the public and the media, and that is going to be prevail in the society. And then those are the criticism that is going to scrutinize all of those outcomes of these like fashions. So we told you on our side of the house that those people can have much more opportunity to like, if you're a minority, you can have much more opportunity to like show off your cultural identity without distortion, without misinterpretation, and you're not going to, yes. So moving on to my second point, to clean out the choice and opportunity kind of argument. So about on the choice. Firstly, as I told you, we still have choices under our side of the house because we're not like excluding all of the kinds of non-Western culture. We're just scrutinizing those the way of adopting non-Western culture. That is to say, they're going to remain a very scrutinized, well-qualified non-Western culture when it's well interpreted. So you still have a diverse chance to choose, and you also have diverse, But 2, they're actually taking away their choice of their minorities. For example, if you're an immigrant and if you're like and if you want to wear a hijab, but when the like society like interpret a hijab is just for a fashion, and you are like pressurized by the like distorted stereotype, and you're misinterpreted by the society. So you're rather like oppressing those choices. But we say that we can have better opportunities to criticize, no matter if it's going to direct the general society to the discourse in a positive way and negative way. When there are people who want to criticize and when there are vulnerables that are going to be protected, we think it is quite legit and it's quite important in this liberal context. Thank you very much.